Something has changed recently. China announced a new rule. Certain export documents must now be submitted in Chinese. Not translated, not optional, required. You might think, that's just a policy, administrative detail. But it's not. It's a signal. Because when a country says, write to us in our language, they are not asking for translation. They are saying, we define how this works now. And that changes something fundamental. For decades, the world operated in English. Every contract, every technical documents, every trade agreements, English was assumed. Not because it was easier, but because power spoke English. Now that's shifting. And if you are learning Chinese, or thinking about it, that matters more than you realize. Because learning Chinese today isn't just about speaking to people. It's about learning to think inside a different system, to see the world through a different map. Every language is a map of reality, and Chinese, it's a map you are going to need. If you want to keep learning with others and get my weekly insight on real-life Chinese and culture, you can join our community, links in the description. Let me tell you what I used to believe. I used to think language was just a tool, words, grammar, meaning. I told my students, learn the vocabulary, master tones, you will be able to communicate. And that's true to a point. But over the years, something shifted in how I understood what I was teaching. As a Mandarin teacher, I watched the students progress through stages. First, they learned the words, then sentences, then conversations. But there was always a moment, a specific moment, when something deeper happened. It's when they stopped translating in their heads, when they stopped thinking in English and converting to Chinese, when they just thought in Chinese. And when that happened, they didn't just speak differently, they understood differently. They noticed different things, they asked different questions. Because every language draws a map to reality. It defines what can set easily and what must be struggled for. Here's what I mean. In English, you might say, I'm interested in this. In Chinese, you say, 我对这个感兴趣. Literally means, I towards this feel 兴趣, interesting. It's not just different words, it's a different structure of meaning. English puts I first, Chinese put the relationships first, towards this. That's not a grammar, that's a logic. That's how the language organized the thoughts. And once you internalize that logic, you are not just speaking Chinese, you are thinking through Chinese patterns. You notice relationships before subjects, context before actions. You are reading a different map. This is what I didn't understand at first. I thought I was teaching communication, but I was actually teaching cognition. Because every language carries its own way of organizing reality, its own assumption about what matters, what comes first, how relationships works. English prioritizes the individual, the subjects, the actor. Chinese prioritizes context, position, relationship. Neither is right or wrong, but they are different maps, and each one shows you things the other hides. When you learn Chinese deeply, you are not just adding words to your vocabulary, you are adding a way of seeing, a way of thinking. And that changes how you read the world. So why this policy matters to learners? So let's come back to this new rule. Export documents must be submitted in Chinese. Why does this matter to someone learning the language? Because it shows you what kind of Chinese you actually need. Most learners focus on conversations, travel Chinese, everyday phrases. Where is the bathroom? How much does this cost? I'd like some tea. Useful, absolutely useful. But this policy reveals something else. There's a whole other level of Chinese, formal Chinese, system Chinese, the kind used in documents, contract, official communications. And that Chinese operates by different rules. Let me give you an example. If you are chatting with your friend, you might say, 我想买这个. I want to buy this. Casual, direct, clear. But in formal documents, you write something like 本公司意向制购此设备. This company intended to acquire this equipment. Same basic meaning, completely different register. Different vocabulary, different structure, different tone. And here's the key. If you only learn conversation Chinese, you will never encounter the second version. You will never know how to read it, how to write it, how to operate within it. But that's the Chinese that opens the door. As a teacher, I've seen this gap constantly. Student comes to me and said, I've been learning Chinese for 2 years. I can chat with people, but when I try to read a contract or fill out a form or write a professional email, I'm lost. Because conversational fluency and functional literacy are two different skills. And what this policy reveals is that Chinese is becoming a functional requirement, not just a cultural skill. You need to understand how the system speaks, how it writes, how it organizes information. You need to read a map at the institutional level. And that means learning Chinese with intention, not just for travel or friendship, but for the moment when language becomes the gateway to participation. Now, think of language as a map. When you learn a language, you are learning to navigate a different terrain. English is one map, Chinese is another. They cover some of the same ground, but they highlight different features, different roles, different landmarks. In English, time is linear. Past, present, future. It's marked grammatically. You can't avoid it. In Chinese, time is contextual. You mark it when it matters. Otherwise, you leave it open. That changes how you think events, about stories, about cause and effect. Here's another one. In English, you build sentences by adding subject, verb, object. Then you add more adjectives, clauses, details. In Chinese, you build by positioning. You establish context first, then you add layers inside of the context. It's not addition, it's a nesting. And once you internalize the logic, reading Chinese becomes natural, you stop translating word by word. You see the structure, the relationship, the flow. You are reading the map directly. This is what I mean when I say learning Chinese isn't just about vocabulary. It's about to think relationally, contextually, structurally. It's about seeing the world through patterns that English doesn't highlight. And the deeper you go, the more you realize. Every language gives you new limits and new freedoms. English lets you isolate ideas with precision. Chinese lets you hold multiple relationships in a view at once. You are not replacing one with the other. You are gaining both. Now here's where it gets interesting. If every language is a map, what happens when you learn two? You don't just have twice the vocabulary, you have two ways of thinking, two ways of organizing reality. And if you can speak both languages, you don't just translate words, you translate the world. Let me give you a real example. English is excellent for precision, for breaking things down into clear, distinct parts. Chinese is excellent for relationship, for showing how things connect, flow, depending on each other. If you only speak English, you will approach problems by isolating variables, by defining terms, by building step-by-step logic. If you also speak Chinese, you will see patterns, connections, systems. You won't replace one with the other. You will use both. You will toggle between them depending on what you are trying to understand. I see this all the time with my students who reach fluency. They tell me, I think about problems differently now. When I am thinking in Chinese, I notice relationship I didn't see before. When I switch back to English, I can articulate them more precisely. They are not just bilingual, they are bicognitive. They can navigate to maps, and because of that, they can see more of the terrain. They notice things monolingual speakers missed, not because they are smarter, but because they have access to two different ways of seeing. This is why learning Chinese isn't just practical, it's transformative. Yes, it gives you access to Chinese system, to trade, to collaboration, to opportunity. But it also changes how you think, how you read situation, how you make decisions. It shows you that the way you are always organizing reality through English isn't the only way. There's other logic, other structure, other map, and once you have seen both, you can't unsee it. Here's the shift that matters most. When you first learn Chinese, you translate. You think in English, you convert to Chinese, you speak. It works, but it's slow, effortful, limited. Because you are always one step behind. You are not responding directly. You are filtering everything through English first. But when you learn to think in Chinese, when you internalize the map, you stop translating. You just respond naturally, directly. And that's when you move from translation to participation. Let me explain what I mean by participation. Translation is external. You are outside of the conversation, converting between two worlds. Participation is internal. You are inside the language, inside the logic, inside the flow. When you participate, you are not thinking about how to say something. You are thinking in the language itself. And once you begin to think in Chinese, something remarkable happens. You start to sense timing and context differently, not as a word, but as reflex. You know when to speak, when to wait, when familiarity matters, when directness is appropriate. It's not conscious anymore, it's instinct. As a Mandarin teacher, this is what I aim for. Not just the fluency, participation. The ability to think, respond, and operate in Chinese without filtering through English. Because that's when Chinese stops being a foreign language, it becomes a second native logic. And that's when it opens the door. Not because you can translate, but because you can act. So why Chinese is becoming essential? Let's bring this full circle. Why does this policy, documents in Chinese matters? Because it shows you where the world is heading. English will remain important, of course, but Chinese is entering the same space. It's becoming a system language, a requirement, not an option. If you want to work in global trade, you will need Chinese. If you want to collaborate with Chinese institutions, you will need Chinese. If you want to understand how Chinese build its system, like trade, technology, infrastructure, you will need Chinese. Not conversational Chinese, functional Chinese. The kind that let you read contracts, write proposal, navigate bureaucracy. The kind that let you participate, not just translate. And here's the thing, this isn't temperate, this isn't a trend. China isn't going anywhere. Its economy, its influence, its system, they are only growing. Which means the demand for Chinese isn't going to decrease, it's going to increase. And the earlier you start, the more advantage you have. Not just in career terms, in cognitive terms. Because learning Chinese doesn't just teach you a language, it teaches a way of thinking, a way of noticing, a way of responding. And that way of thinking is becoming essential for navigating the world. So what does this mean to you? If you are learning Chinese or thinking about starting, this is your moment. Not because it's trendy, not because it's impressive, but because it's access and transformation. Access to system, to opportunities, to a way of thinking that English doesn't give you. And that's exactly what we focus in our community. We don't just teach words, we teach maps. We teach you participate. How to think in Chinese, how to structure your ideas the way Chinese does. How to move from translation to natural response. We work in real-world context, professional emails, formal documents, everyday conversation that matters. And we do it with live feedback. Because thinking in Chinese requires practice, corrections, and guidance. Not just the theory, not just the drills. Real interactions when you learn to sense the timing, the tone, the logic. We create a space where you can practice thinking in Chinese, not just about it. Because that's the only way to truly internalize the map. You are welcome to join us. The link's in the description. But whether you're joining or not, here's what I want you to remember. Language isn't just communication. It's cognition. It's structure. It's a map of reality. And Chinese is a map you are going to need. Not just to speak to Chinese people, but to think through Chinese logic, to understand Chinese system, to participate in space where Chinese define how things work. For a long time, English was enough. It was the universal map, the default. But that's changing. Chinese is entering the same space, not replacing English, joining it. And if you want to navigate the new terrain, if you want to operate in both worlds, you need both maps. So here's my invitation. Don't just learn Chinese as a hobby. Learn it as a way of thinking. Learn it as access, as participation, as a second cognitive map. Because when you do, you are not just adding a skill. You are transforming how you see the world, how you respond to it, how you act within it. And that transformation, that's what language awakening really means. Language isn't just communication, it's participation. I will see you in next video.